I think I actually prefer the standing up to the sitting down camera angle, but I don't know. Hi everybody, it's Jade, and in the month of February I read 8 books, which I am very surprised about. For some reason I thought I'd only read like 5, but then I looked back through my Goodreads and found out that no, actually I read more than that. I'm gonna revert back to my old format of audiobooks first, although I only read 1 audiobook this month, so it's not exactly going to be like a big section. So the only audiobook I listened to this month was Pog by Padraig Kenny. I gave this a 3-star. This was a middle grade book that set in Ireland and follows the story of Pog, who is a member of the First Folk, which is a kind of like fae-like creature that's but he's more like animalistic. He's like covered in fur and everything like that. And his relation, like, he is tasked with looking after this house that's sort of in the middle of nowhere, because it's like the gateway to another world that has like bad things in it, and he has to keep that gateway closed. And at the beginning of the book, a family move into this house, and after having it's like a dad and 2 kids, and they've just lost their mother, and so they're moving into this house, and it's sort of like the kids' relationship with Pog and how it's helping them heal, whilst also you've got this like fantastical thing in the background. And I really enjoyed it. I don't know, maybe it's just I haven't read a lot of middle grades, especially at this age, but surprisingly graphic for the age range that I think it's aimed at. Like, not necessarily like in a bad way, but some of the like fight scenes and like the things that happen in them were just surprisingly graphic to me for the age, like I said, for the age that I feel is going to be reading this book. I don't know. After that, I read Never Anyone But You by Rupert Thompson. This was also a 3-star. This one is a beautiful cover. I have to say, this like colour scheme I'm loving. This one, I thought I would like it more than I did. I still enjoyed it. The fact that this is based on a true story made it more like meaningful for me. I wasn't super in love with the 2 main characters, mostly Claude. I found her a bit pretentious and a bit like, oh, for the love of God, just get over yourself. But then again, I felt bad because I was like, well, this is actually a real person, it's not like a fictional character. But anyway, this follows a story of Claude and Marcel, who were 2 women growing up in originally Paris just before the Nazi occupation. And they fall in love with each other, and of course this is back when it was like illegal and frowned upon to be gay. So they hide their love for each other, and yet because they grew up as childhood friends, they still get to like live together and basically have a full life together, which I really liked that. But they moved to Jersey just as World War II is sort of starting, and it's the story of them both being artists in different ways. Claude is a writer, Marcel is a painter and artist. They start a highly illegal and very dangerous like anti-Nazi propaganda campaign because Jersey was occupied during World War II. And so it's a story of them, one, trying to survive like the severe rationing, and the fact that Claude is also has Jewish ancestry, and despite not being Jewish herself, that didn't matter to the Nazis. If you were from a Jewish family, that was it. And all of the like their relationship whilst doing this dangerous, like, illegal activity, but their, like, conviction in what they were doing that kept it going. And there were times where I was like, this is, like, I have, like, the tension that they're going through, and I feel for them, and, like, how much they're going through because they're doing all of this and they don't have enough food to feed themselves or anything to keep themselves warm. They're, like, burning their furniture, and yet they're still trying to do their part to help with, like, the war effort. And yeah, the more I'm talking about it, the more, like, the concept, everything I really liked. I liked the writing style. I loved some of the conversations they had about gender and sexuality and all that stuff, because Claude and Marcel was not neither of their given names. They both chose more masculine or gender neutral names as they were growing up, because Claude especially, you can tell she's not super, like, attached to the female gender. She's very fluid. She genuinely does not care if she gets... I'm only using the female pronoun because that is the pronoun that is used for her throughout the book, and yet there are times where she is mistaken for being... Well, not mistaken, but people think she's a boy, and she's, like, more than happy with that. She's like, yeah, why not? Use he, use she, use whatever. And considering the time period this was in and everything, and just the looseness of both of their, like, concepts of gender it was just really refreshing, and I really liked that. Also, this was my Sapphic book for the Pop Sugar Challenge. I'm trying not to use the word prompt as much as I did in my January wrap-up, because as I was editing that, I was annoying myself. So I can't imagine how annoying that would have been for people watching it, and I apologise. And it was also my second. The February prompt for the Buzzword Reading Challenge was a book with pronouns in the title, so this was this one. I'm going to throw it on the floor. After that, I read 12 Years a Slave by Solomon Northrop. I gave this a 3-star, I believe? Yes. I'm really confused about that because it was technically like a 2.5, and I feel really bad about that, considering that this is a true story. But I don't know, I'm not sure. Like, maybe because I knew what it was going into it, I just didn't really connect all that much. It could have been the language used I didn't connect with very well. I found it really funny that whilst Solomon didn't shy away from the stuff that happened to him, he censored every blasphemous word in this. Like goddamn is censored in this. And I don't know, that just kind of really baffled my own mind. I mean, I get it, he was a very religious man, and during the time period that this was set in, blasphemy was probably considered a lot more heinous than it is now. Like, people take the Lord's name in vain constantly. It just it made me laugh. I don't know. I'd be reading about him dealing with, like, a really horrendous, like, whipping that he had to endure that, like, almost killed him, and yet, like, in the next sentence, one of the characters would swear, and yet that would be censored, and I'm like, what? I don't know. This was also one of those where I'm not saying that I wanted it to be more graphic, because, like, the perversion with which we show black pain in our media is, like, awful, and it is, like, glorified, and, like, I can't think of any other word other than, like, being, like, kind of pornographic in a way. It's, like, proper tragedy porn in the way that we show a lot of black stories, and it's, like, awful. But considering this was his own story, I found it weird that we had a lot more discussion of the, like, landscape of, I think, was it Georgia or Washington, of like the places he was going through rather than the people he met and the things that they went through, that I was just there like, I don't understand what I'm reading half of the time. I don't know, maybe I thought the film was better. And again, like, I'm saying all of this and I feel weird about it because this is the true story of what he went through. So I feel like I should have felt more about it than I did. I'm not sure. Childhood as a Slave was my classic by a BIPOC author from my Back to the Classics challenge, and it was also the social horror pick for my Pop Sugar challenge. The next book I read was The Choice by Claire Wade. This was a library book, which is why I don't physically have a copy of it. This was a 4-star. One that I picked up purely because I liked the blurb, and I know that personally I really like dystopian novels, and I found this in the sort of the same way that Stardust was. I thought this was a fresh take on a dystopian future. The Choice is about a UK set in the future where our Prime Minister... This was another thing I found refreshing, is a lot of dystopian novels are set in future America, whereas I understood the politics of this more. So our Prime Minister was elected based on the fact that she was like, I'm going to fix the obesity problem and the unhealthy eating and all that stuff. And then takes it to absolute extremes where sugar is outlawed, cakes are outlawed, you're not allowed to, our main character before this woman was made a prime minister was a baker, and then as soon as this woman is put into power, she loses her business and becomes a social pariah and is demonized as one of the worst things in the world to be a baker. And the whole concept was, it made things like going grocery shopping a super stressful experience because you had to get weighed before you were allowed to buy certain things. Based on your weight, you were given a ration of butter and milk and things like that. And how that affects people's psyches and stuff like that, in that it did go into the whole fat shaming and eating disorders thing that would 100% make a whole lot worse. And the difference between people's just general body shapes, certain people, it doesn't matter how much you starve them, are not going to, because their bodies just aren't built that way, aren't going to look the same as someone else. And the difference in gendered standards, in that women just have to be, I say just have to be, women have to be skinny and dainty, whereas the men in this world have to be thin but also bulky and strong and stuff, and the different pressures that different genders have put on them and things like that. There were certain times where the reason this wasn't a 5-star was because the concept got a little bit one-trick pony-ish about the middle, where I was okay, I feel this could have potentially been a shorter book, because I feel you've run this as far as it will go, and you're not necessarily looking at how this would affect the wider things as well. It's just this one focal point. And then when you get to the third act, it switches again and you get more stuff. I was okay, you've brought me back in again. There was just a point in it where I was a bit bored, is all. And I did think the main character got on my nerves a little bit sometimes. After that, I read Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and I am going to be picking up whatever else she has written. I don't exactly know. I think she wrote one called The Gods of Jade and Shadow, which I need to read as well. This was a 4-star, not quite a 5-star, just because there were a few writing tics that she had that bugged me the more I read it. But in terms of Gothic horror, oh my god, did she do that. This was amazing. Because I'm used to reading Gothic horror as in the Brontes, and very it's all very much set in England because I feel like abysmal weather does Gothic horror very well. But Mexican Gothic is set in 1950s Mexico, I believe, and follows the story of Naomi, who is a young socialite who gets a letter from her cousin who has married this man. It was almost like a shotgun wedding. Not a shotgun wedding in that she didn't seem to want to, but it was very much that she hid the fact that she was getting married almost until the day, and then Naomi hasn't seen her since, and they used to be really close. But she gets a letter from her cousin which basically says, you have to come and help me. I'm like being poisoned, the house, there's something wrong with this house, there's something wrong with this family, you need to help me. So she goes to this house which is owned by this old English family that, oh my god, the classism and like racism and everything that runs through this book is so good. That's a weird way of describing it maybe, but like she got the whole English upper class snobbery like down pat. And the whole, like, there's like a maybe eugenics like through line in this that I was just like, this is making me so uncomfortable because it's so real. But she goes to this house, and this is one of those books where like the house is a character in and of itself, and I loved that. And just literally Gothic is just like, this book is drenched in it. The way things are described is just like creepy, and the characters are just like unnerving. And you do, for like a good, I'd say about to the halfway point in this book before you get an answer as to whether or not the cousin is crazy, or is there a supernatural element here? Is she just like unwell? Is there something wrong with this family? Like, yeah. And then even when you get sort of answers to that, it keeps going and keeps unraveling, and it keeps getting like it makes you do that, like the unnerving, and I loved it. And this was my pick for a book by a Latinx author, and also a book which featured 2 languages, because despite the fact that it's all written in English, they speak in Spanish during this as well, but like I don't speak Spanish, so I'm quite glad that it was actually all in English, but you know that there are times where she's speaking in Spanish. After that, we get to my first DNF of 2022, and that was Life of Pi by Jan Martel. This was going to be my book with the tiger on the cover, but I feel like because I only got to the halfway point, that doesn't count. Yeah. Really disappointed. I'm not sure if I'm disappointed because it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. This ended, like, I thought it was going to be an adventure book a la Castaway, kind of. Instead, I got a pretentious philosophy book. I'm doing this a lot in this video. But it felt disjointed, and like there wasn't actually that much of a plot, and I was just annoyed by the main character because, oh my god, did he love himself. We also get a weird bit where like you get excerpts of this where it's like the author talking about how he's writing this book, which I was not about, because also, my god, does the author love himself. Yeah, I was like, there were bits in this that potentially would have interested me about like animals and zoology and everything, because the first part of this is all about the fact that the main character Pi has grown up with a father who owns a zoo, so he's sort of grown up in and around the zoo. But I don't know, maybe because of what I studied at university, it's very much surface level stuff that I already knew, so I wasn't getting any revelations. And then when you get into like the religious aspect of it, as someone who is very not religious, I didn't care, which sounds bad, but I just didn't. And it was like, the reason I used quotation marks when I said philosophy is because it's philosophical in a very surface level way, and it's stuff that like sounds deep when you first read it, and then you think about it for a second, you're like, no, that's something that, you know, the stoner that you knew at university who thought he had all of the answers to the world, but instead he was just a privileged asshole, used to spout. So I didn't give a rating to this because I don't tend to give ratings to books that I don't finish unless I absolutely hated it. And I didn't hate this. Like, he was a decent writer. I couldn't really fault the actual writing style. Well, actually, no, that's a lie. That's a lie. Because if there's one word that I could probably use to describe this, it would be lists. Instead of giving us rich descriptives or building the world that way, he just gave us lists. Like, he would start talking about something and then he would just, like, list all of the animals that he was talking about, or all of the plants, or it was just comma after comma after comma of just lists of things. I'm like, oh, I get it. Shut up. Like, oh my god. So, yeah, I got to, the halfway point, I think. And we'd only just got to, like, the shipwreck. And I was like, I don't care. So I stopped. In contrast to Life of Pi, I then read the first 5-star of 2022, and that was Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune, and oh my god, my heart. Like, I shouldn't have really been surprised that this was going to be a 5-star, considering that The House in the Cerulean Sea was like an instant 5-star, so I know that I love TJ Klune's writing, and he writes like lovely, warm books. This was, I'd say, whereas I definitely would class The House in the Cerulean Sea as a middle grade, this was probably close to a young adult, I think. But, oh my god. Whereas the philosophy in Life of Pi was just pretentious and surface level, the philosophy in this was just heartwarming and lovely and comforting in a very similar way to the philosophy in A Psalm for the Wild Built, which is probably why I loved it so much, because that kind of warm, cozy fantasy / sci-fi is something that I live for, and just adorable queer romance is also like, oh my god, it's something that will get me every time. This is the story of Wallace, who right at the beginning of the book dies, and he wasn't a nice person when he was alive. He was a like hard-ass lawyer who didn't, I think, tend to see other people as people. They were just, he saw them as, what can you provide for me? The people who worked for him were just parts in a machine, and if they weren't working absolutely perfectly, they were gone. You just replace them. They're completely expendable. So when he dies and finds out that literally the only people that go to his funeral are his ex-wife and the partners in his law firm, and they're only really there to, like, one, show up, and two, talk about how much of a bastard he was, he's like, damn. The only reason he knows that is because he hangs around afterwards, and that is where a reaper called May comes to pick him up and take him to a place called a way station, which is where spirits go after they've just recently passed, and they meet a fairy person who will help them to accept the fact that they have died and go on to whatever is next. So the way station he gets taken to is this quirky little tea shop owned by a ferryman named Hugo, who is such a, like, small bean cinnamon roll. Like, oh, he's so lovely. I love him so much. Who is still relatively new at being a ferryman, I believe. I don't think he's been doing it that long, probably like 4 years. But he's one of those people that just, like, seems to know what to say to comfort people, and whether or not they need words, or if they just need someone to be there with them. Because he's just, like, he's like an empath, really. And his grandfather, who is also dead, who has just refused to leave this way station no matter what Hugo sort of, like, does to help him move on. He's like, no, I need to be here to look after my grandson. like, leave me alone. It basically says that Hugo is empathic to a fault. Like, he will feel your feelings and just be there for you. And through this, like, friendship with Hugo, Nelson, the grandfather, and May, the Reaper, Wallace becomes, like, a better person after he dies. And it's like, oh my god, it's found family, and it's lovely, and yet there's still, like, tension and, oh my god, heartbreaking moments where you get confronted with, like, the reality of mortality and how different people would react to that, and the different types of deaths that people can unfortunately experience, and how that would, like, affect your spirit after the fact. Like, Wallace dies from a heart attack, like, out of nowhere. But you also have characters that have chosen to die, and how that can, like, really badly affect you, because if you've had to make that choice because you felt like you couldn't deal with the fact that you are still here, and then you are still here after the fact, like, how would that fuck you up? Or people who are, like, murdered and have their life taken that way, or, like, through a long illness or something, and it was like I'm, like, shaking and almost crying just thinking about it, but none of this made me feel, like, depressed. It was all, like I say, like, comforting, and oh god, yeah, no, that is a harsh reality, but it's, like, being wrapped up in, like, a lovely way. And yeah, I'm, like, not ashamed to say that I cried a couple of times during this. But most of the time it was, like, because my heart was so full at that point that I was like, ah! Okay, this was my book with an onomatopoeia in the title, and a book about found family for the Pop Sugar Challenge, because, oh my god. Is TJ Klune ever going to do something that isn't found family, and am I ever going to not read it? I don't think so. Literally, I will read anything that this man puts out. Anyway, moving on. The last book I read in the month of February was Horror Store by Grady Hendrix. And you can tell that Grady Hendrix is a screenwriter before he is a novelist, because... And that's not a bad thing. Because reading this, I could picture the horror movie that could be made from this, like, perfectly. And yet there were also times where, like, oh my god, maybe it's because I don't read horrors all that much, I don't read, like, straight up horrors, that there were some descriptions of either, like, the deaths or just the stuff that happens that I was like, ooh, oh my god, like, I was properly, like, face journeying through this in, like, oh my god, oh, that's awful, Like, there are parts of this that stuck with me in my head and, like, made me react quite viscerally, that I was like, ooh. And I don't even think you can classify this as, like, a body horror book, so I have no idea how I would react to reading, like, an actual body horror book, so I don't know. But yes, sorry. Point of Horror Store is, it's set in a knockoff version of IKEA that things have been, like, happening during the night, and when people come in to open the shop, they're finding, like, the sofas have been, like, soiled, or something's been broken or something like that. So the floor manager decides that he and a couple of other people are going to stay from closing to opening to try and find out what's going on. Is someone breaking in and messing with stuff? Like, what's happening? And then stuff starts happening because you're in a big store after dark, and yeah. It's like, it is typical horror fare. As somebody who, like, loves horror movies, it's formulaic in that aspect, but once again, not in a bad way. One of the reasons I will watch horror movie after horror movie is because the formula doesn't bother me. I know, like, that I'm going to get a final girl and a first girl. I know that, like, when you think, if it's like a slasher, when you think the guy is down, you always check because he isn't, and, like, and stuff like that. But the only thing... Did I give a rating for this? I don't think I did I? This was a 4-star. The only reason it wasn't a 5-star is because it could have been longer, in my opinion. He did the build-up to the, like, reveal before we get the, is it something paranormal, is it just things get a bit creepy after dark. Then when the like proper action started happening after you've had that reveal, that seemed to be over with a bit too quickly in my opinion, and considering how good he was at writing gore, even though I was reacting like, ugh, I could have done with a bit more of it, to be honest. I felt like that section could have gone on a bit more. But yeah, it was fun to read. It was a good, lighthearted, you know what I mean, easy to read book. And I loved the mixed media aspect of it. I love the fact that it's laid out like an IKEA catalogue. I love the fact that these things here, without spoiling it too much, the first half before you get the reveal is all things that you would sort of find in an IKEA catalogue. You have like this kitchen table, you have like a wardrobe and a sofa, and you have the description of it and stuff like that. And then the further you get in, those things start to change. And it's really subtle to begin with. I think I might have missed the first one and was like, oh, well, yeah, that's just like the corporate speak's just getting a bit more jaded and stuff, and like it's becoming more obvious that this is just soulless corporate speak. And then the next one I was like, oh no, that's not an item you would want in your house. And yeah, oh my god, I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, that was the 8 books I read in February. I'm still surprised that I read that many. Have you read any of those? Did you agree with my opinions? Do you disagree with my opinions? Absolutely fine. Leave them in the comments. Just be respectful of each other's opinions, because that's what they are. If you liked this video, please consider giving it a like or a thumbs up, and maybe subscribe if you want to see more videos like this in the future. And as always, be kind to yourself and be kind to others, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!